The sound of sirens cuts through the quiet suburban night. Red and blue lights flash across perfectly manicured lawns. A frantic 911 call crackles through the static. "Please, you have to come now. Something terrible has happened. My husband. He's not breathing." For 20 years, Sarah believed she had won the lottery of love. A devoted husband who brought her coffee every morning, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Orlando, Florida, and a marriage that neighbors described as couple goals. But what she discovered in their master bedroom on that humid August night was a secret so devastating, so humiliating, it shattered not just her world, but her very identity as a woman. Tonight, we uncover a deception that lasted 2 decades and ended with a man lying motionless on his bedroom floor, while his wife of 20 years stood over him with trembling hands and tears streaming down her face. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about the unbearable weight of living a lie so profound that when the truth finally emerged, it destroyed everything in its path. How could someone maintain such an elaborate facade for 20 years? What kind of secret was worth dying for? And when Sarah finally learned the truth about the man she shared a bed with for 2 decades, why did she choose violence over simply walking away? The sirens fade into silence. The police tape goes up. And somewhere in the darkness, the truth begins to emerge. Let's go back to where it all began. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a 52-year-old insurance adjuster who thought she knew everything about her husband. She was the kind of woman who organized neighborhood barbecues, remembered everyone's birthdays, and believed that love conquered all. To everyone who knew her, Sarah was the epitome of loyalty and trust. And then there's Robert Mitchell, 55, a charismatic sales manager who coached Little League on weekends and volunteered at the local food bank. Rob, as friends called him, was the kind of man other husbands envied. Attentive, romantic, always putting his wife first. At least that's how it appeared, but appearances can be the most dangerous lies of all. What was Robert Mitchell hiding behind his perfect husband facade? How did Sarah remain completely oblivious to the truth for 20 years of marriage? What kind of secret destroys not just a marriage, but leaves one person dead and another facing life in prison? Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Sarah and Robert Mitchell's love story began like something from a romantic movie. They met at a company Christmas party in December 1999, when Sarah was a young claims adjuster and Robert worked in pharmaceutical sales. Sarah later told friends that Robert literally took her breath away when he asked her to dance. He was confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard, and he had a way of making her feel like she was the only woman in the room. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures. Robert would surprise Sarah at work with flowers, plan elaborate weekend getaways, and wrote her love letters that she kept in a shoebox under their bed. When he proposed on New Year's Eve 2000, Sarah said yes before he even finished asking the question. They married 6 months later in a beautiful church ceremony, surrounded by family and friends who couldn't stop talking about how perfect they were together. The early years of their marriage were everything Sarah had dreamed of. They bought a modest starter home in a quiet Orlando suburb, spent their weekends at farmers markets and art festivals, and talked endlessly about their future children and the family they would build together. Robert was attentive in ways that made Sarah's friends jealous. He would call during his lunch breaks just to hear her voice, leave sweet notes in her lunch bag, and never made a major decision without consulting her first. But there were small things, tiny cracks that Sarah dismissed as quirks rather than red flags. Robert was intensely private about his past, claiming his childhood was too painful to discuss. He had no close male friends and seemed uncomfortable in large social gatherings. Their intimate life, while initially passionate, began to decline after their first year of marriage. When Sarah brought up having children, Robert always had a reason to wait just a little longer. As the years passed, Sarah adapted to what she believed were normal changes in a long-term marriage. The passionate kisses became pecks on the cheek. The intimate conversations gave way to discussions about household maintenance and work schedules. When Sarah suggested counseling to reignite their romance, Robert assured her that every marriage goes through phases and that they just needed to be patient with each other. Sarah threw herself into being the perfect wife. She kept an immaculate home, learned to cook Robert's favorite meals, and supported his career ambitions without question. When he claimed he needed to travel more for work, she trusted him completely. When he said he was going through a difficult time and needed space, she gave it to him. When their physical intimacy became practically non-existent, she blamed herself and quietly suffered in silence. Their friends and neighbors saw only what the Mitchells wanted them to see. The couple who held hands during evening walks around the neighborhood. The husband who never forgot an anniversary or birthday. The wife who spoke about her husband with genuine love and admiration. At neighborhood gatherings, other women would comment on how lucky Sarah was to have such a devoted husband. If only they knew what was really happening behind the closed doors of 1247 Maple Street. By their 15th wedding anniversary, Sarah had built her entire identity around being Robert's wife. She had few close friendships outside of their couple friends, had turned down several job promotions to support Robert's career, and had convinced herself that their lack of children was simply God's plan. She was content, if not completely fulfilled, believing that their quiet, stable life was something to be grateful for in a world full of divorce and dysfunction. But contentment built on lies is as fragile as a house of cards. And after 20 years of marriage, the foundation of Sarah's entire world was about to crumble in the most devastating way possible. What she would discover in their bedroom wouldn't just end her marriage, it would end her husband's life. August 15th, 2019 started like any other Thursday in the Mitchell household. Sarah left for work at her usual time, kissing Robert goodbye as he prepared for another day of pharmaceutical sales calls. She had no way of knowing that by midnight, police would be photographing her husband's lifeless body and reading her Miranda rights. The day that changed everything began with a forgotten cell phone charger. Sarah had returned home during her lunch break to retrieve it when she heard sounds coming from the master bedroom. At first, she thought Robert had come home sick from work. But as she approached their bedroom door, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Her husband's voice, but speaking to someone in a way she had never heard before. Intimate, passionate. The voice of a man deeply in love. Sarah stood frozen outside their bedroom door, listening to her husband of 20 years speak words of love and desire to someone who clearly wasn't her. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, but what she heard next was even more devastating. Robert wasn't just cheating on her. He was living an entirely different life, with an entirely different identity, expressing desires he had never once shared with his wife. With trembling hands, Sarah quietly pushed open the bedroom door. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Robert sat on their bed, partially undressed, engaged in an intimate video call with someone Sarah couldn't see clearly. But it wasn't just the adultery that destroyed her in that moment. It was the realization that everything about her marriage, everything about her life, had been an elaborate performance. Robert looked up and saw Sarah standing in the doorway. For a moment, time stopped. 20 years of lies hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Robert quickly ended the call and began stammering explanations, but Sarah was no longer listening. She was remembering 20 years of rejection, 20 years of feeling inadequate, 20 years of believing the problem was with her. When Robert reached for her, Sarah pulled away as if his touch burned her skin. "How long?" she whispered. "How long have you been living this lie?" Robert's silence was all the answer she needed. This wasn't a recent affair or a moment of weakness. This was who he really was, and she had been nothing more than his unknowing cover story for 2 decades. The argument that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in their quiet suburban home. Sarah demanded answers about their entire marriage, their lack of intimacy, their failure to have children, and every lie Robert had told her over 20 years. Robert alternated between denial, justification, and finally, a confession that shattered what remained of Sarah's world. He had never loved her the way a husband should love a wife. Their marriage had been his way of hiding his true self from a world he feared wouldn't accept him. Sarah hadn't been his wife so much as his unwitting accomplice in a deception that had stolen the best years of her life. Every anniversary, every Valentine's Day, every moment she had treasured as proof of their love had been nothing more than Robert protecting his secret at her expense. As the truth poured out, Sarah felt something inside her break permanently. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the theft of her entire adult life. While other women her age were raising children or building authentic relationships, she had been living in a fantasy created by a man who saw her as nothing more than convenient camouflage. The physical confrontation began when Sarah discovered a hidden drawer in Robert's dresser filled with evidence of his double life. Photos, letters, and documents that revealed the extent of his deception. Sarah threw the contents of the drawer at Robert, screaming about the 20 years he had stolen from her. Robert tried to physically restrain her, telling her to calm down and think rationally about their situation. But rational thought had abandoned Sarah Mitchell. In that moment, she was a 52-year-old woman who realized she had wasted her entire adult life loving someone who had never existed. The man standing before her wasn't her husband. He was a stranger who had been wearing her husband's face for 20 years. What happened next would forever change both their lives. In her rage and heartbreak, Sarah grabbed a heavy crystal award from Robert's dresser, a sales achievement trophy he had always displayed proudly. As Robert turned away from her, still making excuses and trying to minimize the enormity of his deception, Sarah raised the crystal high above her head. The sound of crystal meeting skull echoed through their quiet suburban home. Robert collapsed immediately, blood pooling beneath his head on the bedroom carpet they had picked out together 5 years earlier. Sarah stood over his motionless body, the trophy still clutched in her hands, and realized that in destroying the man who had destroyed her, she had also destroyed herself. By the time police arrived at 1247 Maple Street, Robert Mitchell was dead, and Sarah Mitchell was sitting calmly in their living room, her hands stained with her husband's blood, and her eyes empty of everything except the devastating knowledge of 20 wasted years. If you're still watching, drop a comment with Florida. Let's see who's following every twist. The 911 call came at 11:47 p.m. on August 15, 2019. Sarah Mitchell's voice was eerily calm as she told the dispatcher, "I think I've killed my husband. You need to send someone to 1247 Maple Street." When asked if she needed medical assistance, Sarah replied, "It's too late for that. He's gone, and I'm the one who made sure of it." Detective Maria Santos arrived at the scene to find something she had rarely encountered in her 15 years of law enforcement. A murder scene where the perpetrator had made no attempt to hide evidence, flee, or construct an alibi. Sarah Mitchell sat in her living room wearing a blood-stained nightgown, her hands folded in her lap, waiting patiently for police to arrest her. The bedroom where Robert Mitchell died told the story of a marriage that had exploded into violence. Blood evidence indicated that Robert had been struck multiple times with the crystal trophy, which Sarah had placed carefully on the nightstand after the attack. The room was in shambles, with personal items scattered everywhere, but it was the contents of an overturned drawer that provided investigators with their first clues about motive. Among the scattered papers and photographs, Detective Santos found evidence of a double life that had lasted decades. Letters, documents, and personal items that painted a picture of a man who had been living a complete lie for 20 years of marriage. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't a case of sudden passion or temporary insanity. This was the volcanic eruption of 20 years of deception. During her initial interview, Sarah showed no remorse for killing her husband, but profound grief for the life she felt had been stolen from her. "I didn't just lose my husband that night," she told Detective Santos. "I lost 20 years of my life. I lost my chance to have children, to have a real marriage, to know what it felt like to be truly loved by someone. He took all of that from me. and I can never get it back." The media coverage of the case was immediate and intense. Local news stations led with headlines like, "Suburban wife kills husband after discovering secret double life," and 20-year marriage ends in murder. The story had everything that captured public attention: a perfect couple facade hiding devastating secrets, a middle-aged woman's life destroyed by lies, and a brutal murder that shocked the quiet Orlando suburb where the Mitchells had seemed like model neighbors. Neighbors and friends struggled to reconcile the Sarah Mitchell they knew with the woman who had bludgeoned her husband to death. Margaret Thompson, who lived next door, told reporters, "Sarah was the kind of person you wanted as a neighbor. She brought us soup when we were sick, watered our plants when we traveled, and never had a bad word to say about anyone. If someone had told me she was capable of murder, I would have laughed at them." But as investigators delved deeper into the Mitchell marriage, a different picture emerged. Friends began admitting that they had noticed cracks in what they had assumed was a perfect relationship. Sarah's sister revealed that Sarah had confided her concerns about their lack of intimacy and Robert's secretive behavior, but had always defended her husband when others questioned his actions. The forensic evidence confirmed Sarah's account of what had happened that night. Robert Mitchell had died from multiple blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by the crystal trophy that had ironically celebrated his professional achievements. The time of death was consistent with Sarah's confession, and there was no evidence to suggest that anyone else had been present during the confrontation. As news of the case spread, it became a lightning rod for debates about deception in marriage, the limits of forgiveness, and whether emotional abuse could justify physical violence. Online comment sections filled with people taking sides, some viewing Sarah as a cold-blooded killer, and others seeing her as the ultimate victim of psychological manipulation. But investigators were about to uncover details that would add yet another layer of complexity to an already shocking case. The evidence found in Robert Mitchell's hidden drawer wasn't just proof of infidelity or sexual identity deception. It was evidence of a level of manipulation and calculated cruelty that went far beyond keeping secrets from a spouse. As Detective Santos would later testify, what we discovered wasn't just a man hiding his true self from his wife. It was a man who had systematically destroyed his wife's self-worth, her opportunities, and her entire sense of reality for 20 years. Sarah Mitchell didn't just kill her husband. She killed the man who had been slowly murdering her soul for 2 decades. The question that would dominate the trial wasn't whether Sarah Mitchell was guilty of murder. She had confessed immediately and never wavered from her account of that night. The question was whether a jury would see her as a killer or as the final victim of a 20-year campaign of psychological abuse so severe that it had driven a gentle, law-abiding woman to commit an act of violence that shocked everyone who knew her. What investigators discovered in Robert Mitchell's hidden life would transform the case from a straightforward murder into something far more disturbing and complex. As Detective Santos and her team analyzed the contents of the hidden drawer and examined Robert's electronic devices, they uncovered a level of deception and manipulation that went far beyond marital infidelity. Robert Mitchell hadn't just been hiding his sexual identity from his wife. He had been systematically gaslighting Sarah for 20 years, convincing her that she was the reason their marriage lacked intimacy, that she was inadequate as a woman, and that she should be grateful for his loyalty despite her supposed failures as a wife. Text messages recovered from his phone revealed conversations with friends where he mocked Sarah's attempts to improve their relationship and laughed about how easily he could manipulate her emotions. Even more shocking was the discovery that Robert had been actively sabotaging Sarah's opportunities for fulfillment and independence throughout their marriage. When Sarah had been offered a promotion that would have required her to travel, Robert had convinced her that accepting it would damage their relationship. When Sarah had expressed interest in fertility treatments during their early years of marriage, Robert had secretly scheduled appointments for himself to ensure the treatments would fail, then convinced Sarah that her body was the problem. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who evaluated the case, explained the devastating impact of Robert's actions. This wasn't just a case of a man hiding his sexual orientation. This was systematic psychological abuse designed to keep Sarah completely dependent on Robert while destroying her sense of self-worth. He had convinced her that she was lucky to have him, that no other man would want her, and that their marriage problems were entirely her fault. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of journals that Sarah had kept throughout their marriage, documenting her attempts to understand why she felt so empty and unfulfilled despite having what she believed was a good marriage. Entry after entry revealed a woman desperately trying to fix problems that didn't exist in her, while her husband systematically reinforced every insecurity and self-doubt she expressed. Court records revealed that Robert had also been financially controlling, managing all their investments and retirement accounts while keeping Sarah on a tight budget for their future. What Sarah didn't know was that Robert had been secretly funneling money into accounts she knew nothing about, preparing for a life that didn't include her, while ensuring she would have nothing if their marriage ended. Perhaps most devastatingly, investigators discovered that Robert had been planning to leave Sarah within the next year, but only after ensuring that she would be left with nothing. He had been systematically transferring assets, had consulted with divorce attorneys about how to minimize alimony, and had been telling his secret partner that he was finally ready to get rid of the dead weight that was his marriage to Sarah. When this evidence was presented during the trial, even hardened courtroom observers were visibly shaken. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just discovered that her husband was living a double life. She had discovered that she had been the victim of a 20-year campaign of psychological torture designed to destroy her as a person while keeping her useful as camouflage for Robert's real life. The prosecution argued that regardless of Robert's deception, murder was never justified and that Sarah should have simply divorced him and moved on with her life. But the defense painted a picture of a woman who had been so systematically broken down and manipulated that she was no longer capable of rational decision-making when confronted with the truth about her marriage. Dr. Williams testified that Sarah exhibited all the signs of severe psychological abuse, including learned helplessness, complex trauma, and what she termed reality distortion syndrome. After 20 years of being told that her perceptions were wrong, that her needs didn't matter, and that she was fortunate to be tolerated by her husband, Sarah had lost the ability to trust her own judgment or believe she deserved better treatment. The revelation that Robert had been planning to abandon Sarah after destroying her financially and emotionally added another dimension to the case. Sarah hadn't just been living with a man who was deceiving her about his identity. She had been living with someone who viewed her as an obstacle to be removed once she was no longer useful to him. As the evidence mounted, public opinion began to shift dramatically. What had initially appeared to be a case of a wife overreacting to her husband's infidelity was revealed to be something far more sinister. Sarah Mitchell had spent 20 years married to someone who had never seen her as a human being deserving of love, respect, or basic honesty. The courtroom was silent as the final piece of evidence was presented. A letter Robert had written to his secret partner, dated just 1 week before his death, in which he detailed his plans to finally get rid of Sarah and described her as the biggest mistake of my life, but a necessary one for keeping up appearances. He had signed the letter, soon to be free of suburban hell and ready for our real life together. Sarah Mitchell had killed her husband just days before he was planning to destroy her completely and disappear from her life forever, leaving her emotionally and financially devastated at age 52 with no warning and no explanation. The question was no longer whether she was guilty of murder, but whether any reasonable person could have responded differently when faced with such complete and calculated betrayal. The trial of Sarah Mitchell began on March 15, 2020, and immediately became one of the most closely watched criminal cases in Central Florida history. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Ross, maintained that regardless of Robert Mitchell's deception and manipulation, Sarah had committed premeditated murder and should be held fully accountable for her actions. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ross argued in his opening statement, we are not here to determine whether Robert Mitchell was a good husband or whether he treated his wife fairly. We are here because Sarah Mitchell chose to end another human being's life with a crystal trophy instead of walking away from a marriage that wasn't working. Murder is never the answer to marital problems, no matter how severe. But the defense, led by attorney Jennifer Walsh, painted a dramatically different picture. Walsh argued that Sarah Mitchell was the victim of the most severe form of psychological abuse, and that her actions on the night of August 15th were the result of a complete psychological break caused by 20 years of systematic emotional torture. Sarah Mitchell didn't wake up one morning and decide to kill her husband, Walsh told the jury. She was slowly murdered, piece by piece, year by year, until the night she discovered the truth about her marriage. There was nothing left of the woman she used to be. What happened in that bedroom wasn't just the death of Robert Mitchell. It was the final destruction of a woman who had been psychologically murdered over the course of 20 years. The testimony that followed was both heartbreaking and shocking. Sarah's sister testified about watching her sibling transform from a confident, vibrant young woman into someone who constantly apologized for existing and believed she was fundamentally flawed as a person. Former colleagues described how Sarah had turned down promotions and opportunities because she believed her husband's career was more important than her own. Dr. Williams's psychological evaluation revealed the full extent of the damage Robert's manipulation had caused. Sarah scored in the severe range for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, showed signs of learned helplessness that were typically seen in kidnapping victims, and had developed what psychologists call trauma bonding with her abuser. Mrs. Mitchell's psychological state on the night of the murder was consistent with someone experiencing a complete dissociative break, Dr. Williams testified. After 20 years of having her reality systematically distorted, discovering the truth about her marriage caused a psychological crisis that rendered her temporarily incapable of rational decision-making. The most powerful testimony came from Sarah herself. Taking the stand in her own defense, she spoke quietly but clearly about what it felt like to discover that her entire adult life had been built on lies. "I wasn't just angry that Robert had been unfaithful," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was devastated by the realization that I had never existed as a real person to him. For 20 years, I thought I was someone's beloved wife. That night, I realized I had been nothing more than a prop in someone else's performance." When asked about the moment she struck Robert with the crystal trophy, Sarah's voice broke. "I don't remember making a conscious decision to hurt him. I remember feeling like my entire life was collapsing, like everything I thought I knew about myself and my marriage was disappearing. When I saw him standing there, still making excuses, still trying to manipulate me even as my world was falling apart, something inside me just broke." The prosecution's cross-examination was aggressive, with DA Ross repeatedly emphasizing that Sarah had multiple opportunities to leave Robert or seek help instead of resorting to violence. But Sarah's responses revealed the depth of her psychological conditioning. "I didn't think I deserved better. After 20 years of being told that my needs didn't matter and that I was lucky to be wanted by anyone, I didn't think I had any other options." The jury deliberated for 3 days, a length of time that suggested they were struggling with the competing narratives presented by both sides. When they finally returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The verdict, guilty of voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, with a recommendation for the minimum sentence due to the extraordinary circumstances of the case. Judge Rebecca Martinez sentenced Sarah Mitchell to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 5 years. In her sentencing statement, Judge Martinez addressed the complexity of the case. "This court recognizes that Mrs. Mitchell was the victim of severe psychological abuse over many years. However, we cannot condone taking another person's life, regardless of the circumstances. This sentence reflects both the severity of the crime and the exceptional factors that led to it." The verdict sparked intense debate across the country. Some viewed it as too lenient, arguing that domestic abuse never justifies murder. Others believed that Sarah had already served her sentence during 20 years of psychological imprisonment and should have been acquitted entirely. Sarah Mitchell was released on parole in September 2024 after serving 4 years and 1 month of her sentence. Now 57 years old, she lives quietly in a small apartment across the state from Orlando, working as a victim advocate for a domestic violence organization. She rarely grants interviews, but when asked about her case, she always emphasizes one message. "I want people to understand that abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises. Sometimes the most devastating violence is what you can't see." The case of Sarah Mitchell continues to be studied by psychologists, legal experts, and domestic violence advocates as an extreme example of how psychological abuse can destroy a person's capacity for rational decision-making. It serves as a stark reminder that behind the facade of even the most perfect-seeming marriages, devastating secrets can destroy lives in ways that are both tragic and irreversible. As we reach the end of Sarah Mitchell's story, we're left with questions that have no easy answers. Was Sarah a cold-blooded killer who chose violence over divorce? Or was she the final victim of a 20-year campaign of psychological torture that left her incapable of seeing any other way out? Think about this. If you discovered tomorrow that your entire marriage had been built on lies, that your spouse had been systematically undermining your self-worth for decades while planning to abandon you, how would you react? Could you walk away calmly from 20 years of deception and manipulation? Or would you understand the rage and desperation that drove Sarah Mitchell to pick up that crystal trophy? What strikes me most about this case is how easily it could happen to anyone. Sarah wasn't mentally ill or predisposed to violence. She was a kind, trusting woman who believed in the power of love and commitment. Her tragedy was loving someone who saw that love as weakness to be exploited rather than a gift to be treasured. Do you think Sarah received justice with her sentence, or should she have faced more serious consequences for taking Robert's life? Would you have spotted the red flags in their marriage that Sarah missed? Or could you see yourself falling into the same trap of believing that love means accepting whatever treatment you receive? The most heartbreaking aspect of this story might be that Sarah Mitchell lost more than 20 years of her life to Robert's deception. She lost her chance to have children, to experience authentic love, and to build a life based on truth rather than lies. No prison sentence could ever equal the sentence Robert had already imposed on her. If this story resonates with you, I want you to know that help is available. Psychological abuse is real, it's devastating, and it's never acceptable. If you recognize yourself or someone you love in Sarah's story, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You deserve better than a life built on lies. And if you found this case as compelling and disturbing as I did, you won't want to miss our next investigation. We'll be exploring the case of Michael Thompson, a Florida man who discovered on the night his first child was born that his wife had been living under a stolen identity for their entire 7-year marriage. What he found when he started digging into her past led to a revelation so shocking it made national headlines and changed how law enforcement investigates identity fraud. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest true crime investigations. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about Sarah Mitchell's case. Was she a victim or a killer? Could this happen in your community? I read every single comment, and your thoughts help shape future episodes. Until next time, remember that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in plain sight, and the most perfect marriages might be the ones with the darkest truths lurking beneath the surface. Stay safe out there, and never stop questioning what seems too good to be true.